Hey guys, my name is Oleg and welcome to the third part of the devlog for my Unreal Engine 5 game Circulation. In this video I will talk about the player character, its appearance, mechanics, sound design, as well as some problems and challenges I faced along the way. So if you're someone who enjoys seeing all those little parts coming together and appreciates the detail and work that goes into it, this devlog is for you. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is the appearance of the player, which can be divided into two groups, being meshes and material. Right from the start I decided not to use Unreal's default third-person character. You see, when I started this game, it was just a little project to understand and learn how Unreal Engine works. I wanted to keep the complexity low by not dealing with things like rigging or animation, which I'm doing now anyway. And that's why a simple sphere seemed to be the best solution or compromise for someone who just starts out between a basic form and basic functionality. But it doesn't have to look bare bones. Even with a simple sphere like this, you can always bring in more detail and make it visually more distinct. I was looking through some tutorials and experimented with Blender and eventually settled on this pressure simulation, which looks quite neat, I think. It gives the player character this biological or organic form, which creates a nice contrast to the cold and mechanical world. Throughout the development, I changed the meshes from time to time, reducing the poly count, especially with the cage surrounding the sphere. I switched up the form quite a bit to be more simpler, but also more distinct, I believe. Now to the second part, creating textures and materials. Although I'm trying to create all the materials within Unreal itself because I think it's more flexible in the end, the player character consists of two materials. The first material I made directly in Unreal, and it's applied to the sphere itself and resembles something like a beating heart or a living organism. So on top of this organic shape the sphere already has, I'm trying to enhance this feeling of a living organism by enhancing it with an appropriate material. The second material I'm using for the cage surrounding the sphere itself are materials from Sanctus library in Blender. Because the ball is obviously rolling around in this cage, I needed a metallic material that looks old and used and has some edge wear on the edges. And that's why I used this old metal material from Sanctus library, because it has all the characteristics I was looking for and it's very powerful and flexible to work with. One thing I forgot to mention about the living material of the sphere. Although it was somewhat complex to set this material up, it's quite rewarding in terms of its possibilities. And that brings me back to what I said earlier. There are many things that you can do to make even a simple sphere like this be more interesting. Now with this material I have the option to change the radius of the sphere mask. Although it's a very small detail, I use this to convey a certain feeling of presence in the game world. When the player collides with the railings of the platforms or other objects, the sphere mask quickly shrinks and goes back to its original size. In that way I'm trying to give visual feedback that the player actually interacts with the environment, and it's something like you bumped your toe on something and it hurts and you flinch or twitch from the pain. Okay, now let's go over the mechanics and the logic of the player character. Now this may look like a lot, but actually it's not that complicated. To be honest with you, my player character doesn't have a lot of functionality, at least for now, but it's actually enough. The main thing it does is basically just rolling around, but even with that you can do a lot of things. You can roll around to move through the level, you can push to rotate things, or you can bump into them to break, open or activate them. Regarding the actual blueprint functionality for the movement, it's fairly easy, although it's not without flaws. For rolling the sphere around, I'm taking the camera's right and forward vector and adding force to it. But it doesn't mean the movement is directly bound to the camera. You can rotate the camera however you want and roll into any direction regardless where the camera is looking at. And I think even that brings some more complexity to the gameplay because you have to rotate the camera to be able to see a pitfall or to understand a puzzle, to rotate it into the correct position and to explore the environment in general. I really enjoy working with these constraints because for me as a designer, it's a very cool challenge to come up with new ideas and cool mechanics to build on top of this very simple movement and make the gameplay more fun. There are two main problems that I run into with the movement, and only one of them has been solved so far. The first problem was pushing two buttons at the same time, which means when you push W and right to go diagonally, the sphere would be much faster than, let's say, the speed of just going forward. Now, this issue was simply solved by normalizing the vector. Thank you for the help. The second issue I still have is, depending on the angle of the camera, the speed seems to vary as well. So when the camera is positioned in a way that looks from the side at the player, the force or the speed will be higher than when the camera is positioned on top of the player, because the force will push the player down into the ground. So if you guys have any solutions for this or an example how to do this correctly, please leave a comment. I really would appreciate it. Now, the last topic I want to talk about in this video is sound. Now, the player character obviously needs some sounds when it rolls around. This was somewhat of a challenge in itself because most of the tutorials out there are focusing on the third-person character and the sounds it makes with each step. What I'm doing is I play a rolling sound in a loop and adjust the volume of the sound to the velocity of the player. So when the player is not moving, the volume of the rolling sound will be zero as well because the player's velocity is zero. But when the player starts moving, the velocity increases, the volume of the sound increases as well. Another important thing was the detection of different surfaces to play a different rolling sound. So far I have two different surfaces, a metallic surface and a look-through fenced surface. I recorded the sound myself and created a meta sound containing all the audio assets. Both sounds are played at the same time, but with a trace by channel, I can check what surface the player is currently standing on and adjust the volume of the dedicated surface sound accordingly. So yeah, that's it guys, Circulation Devlog Part 3. I hope it was interesting and motivating, and I hope you got something out of this for your own project. If you want more videos like this or an in-depth look on how to create materials, sound, or come up with an interesting design, please let me know and please follow the channel. Let's keep working on our games because quality takes time. Thank you very much for watching. Bye.